Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I have to be honest with you, I am very nervous and I have a lot of butterflies right now to film this video. And that's because I have a lot to say. I have a lot to say. I've prepared so much for this video. I've been pushing it off. Let's get to the point. This video is going to be about A Court of Thorns and Roses. This series by Sarah J. Maas, which I have quickly become very obsessed with. I started this series last month, read the first book, and was immediately just entranced by this world. And I do consider myself kind of a bookworm, but it's been a while since I found a series that resonated with me as much as this one does. Prior to this series, some of my favorite book series, as basic as they are, have been Harry Potter, Twilight, Maximum Ride, the Divergent series, the Hunger Games. I loved all those dystopian or fantasy series growing up, the kind that just transport you to another world and you feel like you're the characters' friends. Yeah, it's just been a while since I found a series that I can totally obsess over like I have this one. So today I'm going to be talking about the first two books in this series, which are A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury. Now, I have actually read up until A Court of Wings and Ruin. This is the third book, but I have so much to say about these first two that I'm going to have to make a couple more videos for the rest of the series. But I have a list of everything that I want to say on my phone, and it's a very long list, so I would recommend grabbing a drink, grabbing a snack, getting cozy, getting a blanket. Make yourself comfortable because this is going to be a long video. I already know it. I'm gonna make the first part of this video as spoiler-free as I possibly can, and then I'm gonna go into detail for the people who have read this book. So without further ado, let's get right on into the video. So to give you guys a brief description of where this series starts off, the main character's name is Pharah, and she is a young woman who is living in the mortal realms, which is basically just human territory post a world war. But essentially, the lands are separated by Fae realms or fairy realms and human realms. And the humans are very afraid of the fairies because they've heard stories about how they can be very cruel towards the humans. And Pharah and her family, which is her two older sisters and her father, they live in a little cottage and they live in poverty in this human realm. And Pharah's father used to be this wealthy merchant and the family used to be very well off, but he lost his wealth. Pharah's mother died and she made Pharah promise to protect her family and stay with her family. Pharah really took that promise very seriously. Now that they're living in poverty, Pharah for the last couple of years has been going out and taking it upon herself to hunt for her family. This family's only source of food and money right now is Pharah. Her two older sisters really aren't doing much to help the situation. So one day, she's in the woods and she's trying to hunt this deer and a wolf comes up and she gets this gut feeling that this wolf, it could be a wolf, but it also could be a fae. And she has an ash arrow with her, which she knows can kill fairies. So she's like, you know what? My family is starving. I need this deer. If it's a fairy, oh well. She skins the wolf. She carries the deer home. She feeds her family. So then Pharah has to pay the consequences of killing this fairy wolf. And this beast fairy guy comes to her cottage and says, you're either gonna come live in Prythian, which is the fairy realms, with me for the rest of your days, or I'm gonna kill you for what you did because of this fairy treaty. So then Pharah goes on this whole journey into the fairy realms. She has no idea what to expect. All she's ever heard of fairies are bad things, and she goes to this fairy's court and essentially starts a whole new life there, but she's still holding on to that guilt of her mother's promise to stay with and protect her family. And then the story becomes a love story, and it's almost kind of a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but it has its own plot. And I would say the first 2/3 of this book is just a really nice, interesting fantasy story with lots of different creatures, and it's very adventurous, and you see everything for the first time through Pharah's eyes, who has never been in these fairy realms. So you're just really captivated by this world, and you're really curious. And then the last part of this book is really, in my opinion, the best part. The plot becomes really, really interesting, and Pharah's character goes through lots of development. You really root for this girl. There's definitely a lot of twists and turns in here that are very unexpected, and the ending is just fantastic. It's so good. So as soon as I finished this book, I picked up the second one, and this book starts off good, and then it becomes one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's at least twice as good as the first one. As soon as I finished this book, I started it from the beginning and read from start to end again. It took me a while to even want to start the third one because this one was so good and I just wanted to like revel in its glory. Overall, I just really, really enjoy the way that Sarah J. Maas writes. I'm a huge fan of hers now, and I'm ready to read all of her series. This series is so well written, and it gets better and better as the books go. And I really loved reading the first book through Pharah's point of view because you really don't know what to expect because she only knows so much, and you find out the truth along with her. And at the end, everything makes sense. So that's all I have to say for my non-spoiler section of this video. The rest of the video, I'm going to be talking about the plot and what actually happens and the characters of both of these books. So if you have not read these books, I would recommend not to watch this part. Go out and get yourself these books. You will not regret it. With all that being said, A Court of Thorns and Roses, here are my thoughts. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I hope I'm not alone in this, but to me, Pharah just doesn't seem like the youngest child. As much as I try to wrap my head around it, it doesn't make sense to me. To me, it would make so much more sense being the way that Nesta treats Pharah if Pharah was the middle child and Elaine was the youngest, because Nesta babies Elaine and we don't really know why. And then she's just very, very cruel towards Pharah. And I have to be honest with you guys, although Nesta has grown on me throughout the series, and I'm sure she will continue to grow on me, in this first book, I couldn't stand her. I couldn't stand her because of the way she treats Pharah. It's just not right to me. That is your little sister. And I know that some people say it's because she's jealous of Pharah. I don't know, I feel like that would make a lot more sense if Pharah was the middle child, and she's not, she's the youngest. So why is there such an uneven treatment here of the sisters? Okay, now moving on to when Pharah gets to the Spring Court. I remember feeling very sus about this whole situation. Like, why is this treaty so specific? Why is Tamlin low-key being so gracious of someone who killed his friend? You know, there has to be more to the story, is what I'm thinking. And I remember hearing these conversations between Tamlin and Lucien, and I knew something greater was going on, and all we get are these little bits and pieces. And at this point, I'm just super drawn into the story. I remember being a big fan of Lucien at the beginning of the series. I really liked how he took Pharah out and they went hunting together, and I liked their banter, and I liked Tamlin too, but I don't know, there was something sus about him. But then I kind of fell in love with him anyways, along with Pharah, and I shipped them together. But I remember I really started to like Lucien when Pharah goes to him about how to chop the cereal, and he nonchalantly tells her. I'm like, yes, I wanted her to go to the cereal because I wanted answers. But then I was really annoyed at Lucien, because when the Naga comes after her and when Tamlin saves her, I really wished that it would have been Lucien who came to save her, because he told her he would be there. He told her he'd be nearby, and if she screamed, he would come after her, and he didn't. What did you hesitate about exactly, Lucien? Because last time I checked, this girl is your only chance at breaking this curse. Your only chance. You're just gonna throw it away with her dying? I mean, he must really have thought that there was no way this girl was falling in love with Tamlin if he was just gonna let her die. But I loved the part where she met the cereal. I love, honestly, all the parts with all of the creatures. I loved hearing the description of the bog when they're first hunting. I loved hearing about the Naga, and I loved hearing about the cereal. The cereal is my favorite character, other than Pharah, other than Rhys. I love the cereal. Those are my favorite parts of these books. I don't know why, I just love him. I wrote down in my notes that if this is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, then Lucien is Lumiere and Alice is Mrs. Potts. And you know, that just makes sense to me. I also wrote down, and I even made a TikTok about this, that the Ator reminds me of the guy from Barbie Mermaidia, Maximus Fungus, the one who works with Laverna. That's how I picture Amarantha and the Ator. That's them. So just to mention a few of my favorite scenes from this book, I absolutely love the scene with the fairy who loses his wings and Tamlin brings him into the manor. I already loved Pharah. This part made me love her even more because she does have so much compassion. Even though she comes off as this serious, almost cold character, she really does have a lot of compassion for others. And just her being there with him and promising he'll get his wings back, and she says it's because she would not want to die alone. That just got me. I was crying like a little baby in that scene. Another one of my favorite scenes, especially knowing what I know now, is actually Calanmai, and this is obviously because of Rhysand. I love this whole part. I love Rhys and Pharah's first conversation. I love that he saves her. I love how sarcastic he is. Immediately my interest is piqued with him. So after Calanmai, things really escalate and Pharah learns a little bit more about Amarantha and the threat to Prythian. Rhys visits the manor. He absolutely terrifies Tamlin, and Tamlin sends Pharah back to the mortal realms. This part of the story I really was rushing through. I didn't want to read about her back in her family's estate, but I got through it, and I was glad that her family was well taken care of. But I was really happy when Pharah ultimately decides to go back and save Tamlin, and this is when the book really gets good and picks up. She goes back and Alice tells her the truth about what's happening with Amarantha. Everything makes sense now, and Under the Mountain is the best part of this book. It's super intense. I love how all of Pharah's 3 trials are written. My favorite one by far is the Middengard worm. That whole scene, I was like this in my book. I could not put it down. I loved it. I love that she created a freaking bone ladder. She's just so cool. I love that she covered herself in mud so the worm couldn't smell her. So smart. And this whole time, Pharah is breaking. Physically, mentally, emotionally, she's breaking, and Rhys is really the only person who is helping her get through this to not fully break apart, and Tamlin does nothing this entire time under the mountain. It's so frustrating because she's doing so much for him. Pharah ends up breaking her arm and getting really sick, and she's near to the point of death when Rhys comes to help her and basically offers to fix her arm and heal her if she will visit his court 1 week every month. And she takes the bargain. I absolutely love the tattoo on her arm, the eye on it. I love that she can feel things through the bond. I love that they can communicate through it. That whole concept was really interesting to read about. And at least I was very conflicted because we can clearly see that he's helping Pharah, but at the same time, he's doing a lot of stupid things that make us question him. And we later find out that everything he's doing is very planned and thought out, and he's doing everything for a reason. Everything is a master plan. He's basically trying to help her without Amarantha questioning his loyalty. And I think the last trial is absolutely heartbreaking. It also really sets up the next book, A Court of Mist and Fury, because how much the last trial impacts Pharah. And it takes such a toll on her, as one can imagine. It's really, really sad. I was crying through it. And Pharah ends up completing all 3 trials, and it doesn't even matter because Amarantha freaking sucks. And she went around her words with the bargain. But then Pharah breaks the curse with the riddle. And Rhysand really proves himself at the end. He does everything he possibly can to protect Pharah, and we find out that he obviously really cares about her. And then all the High Lords save Pharah by giving her a seed of their power, and she wakes up, and I just feel a little bit weird because this whole time Tamlin did nothing, and this girl has been through so much, and she went through a lot of it with Rhysand. So now I have these feelings for Rhysand, and she goes back to Tamlin, and I know I should be happy, but something just feels off. And then Pharah has her last conversation with Rhys at the end of the book, and she realizes that he was on her side the whole time, and he takes a step back and looks at her in shock before he leaves because the mating bond snaps into place for him and he realizes that she's for sure his mate. So yeah, but we don't know that yet. Then Pharah goes back to the Spring Court, and that's the end of this book, and it had me in a chokehold, and I was so ready for this one. So now let's get into A Court of Mist and Fury. So we start this book pretty much where we left off from the first book, after Pharah goes through her 3 trials and saves Prythian, and she's dealing with all the trauma of everything that happened under the mountain. She is going through a lot. She is waking up in the middle of the night and throwing up, and Tamlin, again, is doing what he does best, which is nothing. And he obviously knows she's struggling, and he chooses to ignore it. But anyways, at the start of this book, we are in the Spring Court with Pharah and Tamlin, and they are engaged to be married very soon. And we meet Ianthe, or Ianthe. I call her Ianthe. I did not like her from the beginning. I got very bad vibes from her. She seems very controlling. She doesn't seem to have Pharah's best interest at heart. Pharah really has no interest in planning this wedding. She really wants to go out and help the people of the Spring Court with all the aftermath of what Amarantha has done to Prythian. And meanwhile, Tamlin and Ianthe are being very controlling. Tamlin is hardly letting her leave the house. He's just really suppressing her and being very controlling and showing lots of red flags. And then we get to the wedding scene where Pharah is walking to the altar in this dress that Ianthe chose for her that is not her taste whatsoever. This whole wedding is not her taste. She is not in the right mindset for this. She's having a panic attack. So then Pharah stops cold center in the middle of the aisle and realizes she can't go through with this, and she's thinking all these things, and Rhys hears her through the bond and he comes to her rescue. And of course Rhys comes in with his iconic line, "Hello Pharah darling," and he calls in the bargain and takes her to the Night Court. And I'm so grateful because Pharah was not ready to marry Tamlin. He's not right for her. I am so glad that he came to get her. So he takes her to the Night Court Palace, which the way that Sarah J. Maas describes it is just absolutely beautiful. Pharah has had all this trouble with very closed in claustrophobic spaces. She has difficulty being in some rooms because she has PTSD from under the mountain. And she gets to this Night Court Palace and it's beautiful and open to the mountains. The air is balmy and warm even though it's freezing cold outside, and she has this beautiful view of the mountains and the night sky, and it's wonderful. Her room is fantastic. It's open windows. She has a big white fluffy bed. She basically has an infinity swimming pool for her bathtub. It smells like night blooming jasmine. It just sounds divine. And Pharah is really pissed at Rhys for calling in the bargain and taking her to the Night Court, but at the same time she's low-key grateful to get away from the wedding, and this is a nice relaxing break for her. Then they have their first breakfast together and we get to know Rhys a little bit more. We realize he's very sarcastic. He's actually hilarious. And then we meet Morgan, and I absolutely love her character. She's a very strong female character, but she's also very warm and welcoming to Pharah, and she becomes her first true female friend in the story, and I love their relationship so much. I feel like Pharah really needed her. And then Rhys teaches Pharah how to read, and he teaches her to practice shielding her mind. He lets Pharah know that she probably has some powers from the seeds that the High Lord gave her, and that essentially war is coming and the King of Hybern wants to take over Prythian. That's essentially the first visit. Then she goes back to the Spring Court and tells Tamlin all this stuff. And I'm so mad at Tamlin right now for being so freaking controlling. I just want her to go back to the Night Court. And then comes the Tithe, or the Tithe, which is essentially where Tamlin sits on a throne and everybody from the Spring Court has to come in and pay their dues. And this part really makes me dislike Tamlin because this is very unnecessary. And again, this is another moment that makes me love Pharah so much because the water wraith comes in, she can't pay her dues, and Pharah gives her her jewelry in order to pay for her tithe or tithe, I don't know how to say it. And you know, that comes in clutch later. So the tithe part of the book was already the final straw for me with Tamlin because I felt that he was extremely privileged and he doesn't understand where Pharah is coming from at all. And as if it can get any worse, then of course there's the scene where he says, "You've done enough, Pharah," and he blows up the freaking study. And thank God Pharah shields herself because she could have severely gotten hurt by that. I was so relieved when Rhys comes to get her the second time. I was like, take this girl out of here. And at this point, Pharah is completely numb. She has essentially lost her personality. She's been through so much that she is just over everything at this point, and she's even stopped her banter with Rhysand. And he's like, listen, tell me how to help you. At this point, he's very concerned for her well-being, and yeah, she's just completely a shell of herself. But then she goes back to the spring court, and Tamlin traps her in the manor. And I am so beyond pissed at this point. I hate this guy. Thank God Mor comes to get her, takes her to the night court. This is when the book really starts getting very interesting because we start to learn about Rhys's life and what kind of High Lord he is, and we get to meet his inner circle. Rhys takes Pharah to Volaris, which is just a dream of a city. And very shortly after, we get to meet Cassian, Azriel, and Amren. And I love all three of these characters. I love the whole inner circle and the dynamics between all of them and all of their individual personalities. It's amazing. And then there's this scene where Pharah has one of her nightmares and Rhys wakes her up from it and takes care of her, holds her hair while she throws up, talks her through it. And I'm like, this is what you should have been doing, Tamlin. And then we have one of my favorite scenes of the whole series when Pharah and Rhys go to the Bone Carver. I absolutely love this scene. I think it's so cool. They go to this ancient jail where this bone carver is, who appears differently to everyone. And Pharah sees him as a young, dark-haired, blue-eyed boy. And I love how you have to give a truth to him for him to give a truth to you. And this is one of those parts that I really appreciate Sarah J. Maas's writing because I love how we get to hear about Pharah's death and everything that happened in those moments. And I loved hearing about how she was tethered to the mating bond and how there was a choice in death. Shortly after Pharah meets the bone carver, she meets the weaver. And the weaver to me is so scary. This part of the book, my heart was racing. I was so stressed for Pharah. The fact we learn that the weaver is using human skin and hair to weave and sew things is so disturbing. Pharah grabs the ring that she's supposed to find and the weaver chases after her, and Pharah has to scale a freaking chimney and throw a brick at her face. She's so brave. I love her, but that scene really freaked me out and I was so relieved when it was over. So then we have the part where Pharah, Rhys, Cassian, and Azriel go to the mortal realms to talk to Elaine and Nesta and try to convince them to use the family estate as a meeting place with the human queens because they need to figure out how to get these books to nullify the cauldron. So I really like this trip to the mortal realms because we get to see Pharah's two worlds collide with her human family and the inner circle. One of my favorite things about this part of the book is getting to hear Cassian challenge Nesta about letting Pharah go off and hunt on her own and then having the audacity to speak to her this way. I'm just like, finally someone says it. Thank you, Cassian. Thank you for acknowledging this. So they send a letter to the human queens and the human queens are taking their sweet time in getting back to them. So they're like, you know what? Let's just go to the summer court and get the first book. We'll deal with the human queens later. And to me, the summer court is when Pharah starts to at least admit to herself some of the feelings that she has been developing for Rhys. And that's all thanks to Cressida, who is the princess of the summer court. Yeah, Pharah gets a little bit jealous and Rhys gets a lot of it jealous from Tarquin. And I really like Tarquin. He seems like a really nice guy, and I get that Rhys has to put on this front, but I wanted Rhys to have this one friend because he's such a good guy and he deserves it. Then we have the iconic scene where Rhys is drinking out of the whiskey glass and Pharah pours herself a glass and she says to him, "To the people who look at the stars and wish, Rhys." That part is so beautiful because Pharah is basically saying, "I see you, I relate to you, and I'm on your side." And Rhys says back, "To the stars who listen and the dreams that are answered." And then we have the scene where Pharah and Amren have to go get the first book, and they go to that little building when the tide goes out, and it's a very stressful scene. They almost drown. Thank God Pharah helped that water wraith because one of her sisters comes to save them, and they get out of the summer court just in time. And then shortly after they leave the summer court, Tarquin finds out what they did and he sends them blood rubies. And this part is really sad when Rhys is out on the roof and he's just looking at the box of blood rubies. But I noticed in this scene, Pharah and Rhys kind of have a role reversal where Rhys goes from being the one who cheers up Pharah to now Pharah cheering up Rhys with this flirty banter they have going on between them. And I thought that was really sweet. So then they go back to the human realms to meet the human queens, and the human queens actually suck. Like, I hate them. They're really not getting the severity of this war that's about to happen with the King of Hybern, and they want proof that Rhys is the High Lord of Peace that he says he is. This is also when Pharah starts to learn about Jurian, Prince Dragon, and Miriam, which comes into play later in the series. So then they have to go to the Court of Nightmares to get this orb so that they can take it back to the human queens to show them proof of Volaris, which will essentially prove that Rhysand is a High Lord of Peace. Then we have the iconic throne scene in the Court of Nightmares where Rhys and Pharah work together to create a distraction so that Azriel can steal the orb. And this is one of the best scenes in the entire book. There's so much tension between Rhys and Pharah. You just want them together at this point. They just make sense. They're both very into each other. But as they're leaving, of course, Kwieraga, who's Mor's father, insults Pharah, and Rhys gets very, very upset. He breaks Kwiera's bones and puts him in his place. I was really pissed at Kwieraga too, so as he should. Then Rhys and Pharah get into this fight, even though we know they both want each other, where Rhys is really apologetic and he's talking about how he shouldn't have brought her there because now she has to deal with these insults from the Court of Nightmares and from Kwieraga. And Pharah's basically saying, "I knew what I was getting myself into. I wanted to be a part of this. I don't want to sit on the sidelines. I don't want you to shut me out like Tamlin did." And then he's like, "Whoa, don't compare me to Tamlin." But this is when Pharah realizes she has real feelings for Rhys because she says something to him that really, really hurts him, and he stays away for a few days until Starfall, and she has no idea how to admit her feelings for him. But then we have Starfall, which is such an adorable scene. It's so cute, and Pharah wears this incredible dress. And then Pharah finally smiles at Rhys on Starfall, and he's so happy to see her smile, and she asks him if he wants to dance, and they end up dancing all night together. Then they are still waiting to hear back from these human queens because the human queens absolutely suck, and they like to take their sweet time again. So then in the meantime, Rhys decides to take the inner circle to the Illyrian war camps because Rhys is now being tracked by Hybern when he uses magic. So he figures, why not use this time to just train Pharah in the woods in the Illyrian war camp. And while they're training one day, we learn that it was Tamlin and his family who actually killed Rhys's mother and sister. Tamlin just keeps getting worse and worse and worse throughout this series. I can't stand him at this point. I can't believe he gave up the location of where Rhys's family was when Rhys had only ever been kind to Tamlin. Then Lucien and some of the guards from the Spring Court find Pharah and Rhys training, and Lucien has the audacity to try to take Pharah back to the Spring Court. She's not having it, and this girl grows wings. And I thought I was hallucinating at this part in the book. I was like, wait, Rhys's wings? And I was like, no, she's talking about her own wings. She used the power that Tamlin gave her to grow wings. Not to turn into a beast, but to grow Illyrian wings. And then we have the inn scene. I love that it's this small little inn, that they don't have a lot of space and it's freezing cold and they're eating soup and drinking wine. This is when they both confess their feelings for each other, and Pharah admits that she can't stop thinking about Rhysand, but she doesn't really admit that she wants something serious with him. Then the next day is very intense. Rhys ends up getting taken down by 7 ash arrows from Hibern, and he takes slashings. He's almost dead, and Pharah loses him. As if Pharah can't get any cooler, she starts winnowing all over the place. She's winnowing, killing the Hibern soldiers. She basically becomes an assassin and goes to rescue Rhys in this cave where they have him chained up and poisoned. So then Pharah goes to visit the Suriel, and he comes in clutch. He tells her how to save Rhysand, and he also slips a little bit of information that he's her mate. Of course, first Pharah is really shocked by this, doesn't know what to do with the information. I don't know that I understand why she was so angry, but it was a lot. She's been through a lot, so I give her a pass. And she wants to be somewhere alone, and I get it. I get that you need to think through it, but girl, you left your mate in the mud, and he just took slashings and arrows. But I do love Mor in this part for being a good friend and taking Pharah to the cabin, bringing her food, and Pharah gets some time to herself to just think and paint. And I can also really relate to her in this moment because I am somebody who likes to isolate when I'm thinking through something, and I like to be creative. But then we have chapter 54 and chapter 55, which are the best chapters of any book ever. I'm not being dramatic. These chapters are insanely good. We get the full story of everything that Rhys went through. We find out that Rhys had been having dreams about Pharah while he was under the mountain years before they even met. And we find out his whole backstory of everything he sacrificed to make sure that his family and his court was safe, everything that he went through with Amarantha and all the trauma that he faced. And when he finally got to meet Pharah and how everything he was doing was trying to protect her, and then he was rooting for her to break the curse, and he helped her break the curse. And the part where he talks about witnessing her death, I was crying along with him. It was a beautiful part of the book, and you really understand everything Rhys has done up until this point. But to me, it's the best part of the book. It's the most emotional part of the book. Pharah accepts the mating bond by giving Rhys the soup, and yeah, it's just really beautiful and emotional. There is a lot that happens at the end of this book. It's very intense. Basically, there's the attack on Volaris, where the Hibern soldiers fly in. It's really upsetting because Volaris has been this protected city this whole time, and then of course the human queens sell it out, and this place that was a safe haven is no longer completely safe. But I was really proud of Pharah at this part for using everything she learned throughout the book in her training with Cassian and Rhys. My favorite part about this whole scene is her using her powers to make the water wolves chase them. And I also love the part where Rhys shows up and he's like, "Where are you?" And Pharah says, "I'm exactly where I need to be," and she takes down the Ator and she's like, "This is for me, this is for Claire, this is for Rhys." That part was just really satisfying. And then we have the final scene of the book where Pharah and the inner circle go to Hibern to attempt to nullify the cauldron. Unfortunately, she couldn't nullify the cauldron. This part was so frustrating because this whole book they've been preparing to do just that, but it turns out the cauldron is too powerful and it would have killed Pharah to nullify it. Then Tamlin just keeps coming in and making things more complicated and worse than they need to be. And so does Ianth. Ianth sucks. She sells out Pharah's sisters, so now Nesta and Elaine get brought into this, and the queens are just selfish. They don't care about the other humans. They just want to be immortal like the Fae. And I was freaking out at the end because Cassian was hurt, Azriel was in danger, the sisters were turning into Fae. I'm like, how are they gonna get out of this? And of course, Pharah deserves a freaking Golden Globe award for her acting performance at the end. She essentially convinces Tamlin that she was under a curse the whole time and that Rhys was controlling her. So she sneaks into the Spring Court and she gets Rhys and the inner circle and her sister's home safe to Volaris, and she infiltrates the Spring Court in order to take them down. I couldn't think of a cooler ending. The fact that Now it's revealed that she's the High Lady of the Night Court, and she just snuck her way into the Spring Court to essentially be a spy. I was screaming. I was so freaking proud of her. I was so proud of Rhys too, because although it was hard to let Pharah go, he knows that she's doing it for her pupil now because she's now High Lady and he respects her. It's just such a good ending to the second book. Such a good cliffhanger. I haven't started the fourth book, but once I finish this one, I'm going to make a second video talking about these two. And then once I read A Court of Silver Flames, I will make my final video on the series. I'm so excited to finish this series and to talk about the rest of it with you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was probably extremely long. Thank you for hanging in there. I needed to rant about this book. I absolutely love this series. I know this video was very different from the videos that I normally upload on my channel, but if you guys like these book videos, I am happy to make more of them. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!